You have a £25,000 a year NHS pension waiting for you at 66. You've worked 28 years on the wards, you're 58, you're tired, and you know you can take that pension early at 60, with a 5% reduction for each year you go early. So the plan makes sense to you. Retire at 60. Take the tax-free lump sum of around £50,000 and get on with your life. Cash in hand. That feels smart. But here's what most people in that exact position never see coming. That two-step decision, taking early and taking the maximum lump sum, quietly costs your spouse £3,750 a year, every year, for the rest of their life. Not a rough estimate. That is the number, built into how these schemes actually work. No standard retirement calculator will flag this for you. It doesn't come up automatically in the letter your pension scheme sends. And because the mechanics are buried deep in something called actuarial factors, most people only find out after they've signed, by which point the decision is locked in for life. I've watched this happen more times than I'd like. Someone does everything right, saves for decades, builds a solid DB pension, and then makes two perfectly reasonable-sounding decisions at the point of retirement and permanently reduces the financial security of the person they were trying to protect. That's what this video is about. We're going to work through the exact numbers. Early retirement reduction first, then the lump sum, then the survivor's pension, so you can see the full picture before you decide. If you're in a public sector scheme and you have a partner, stay with me. This one matters. Let's start with the early retirement reduction, because this is the foundation everything else sits on. In most public sector DB schemes, including the NHS, if you take your pension before your normal pension age, the scheme applies what's called an actuarial reduction. In the NHS scheme, that reduction is roughly 5% for each year you go early. So if your normal pension age is 66 and you retire at 60, that's 6 years early, the scheme reduces your pension by 30%. On a £25,000 pension, that takes you down to £17,500 a year, a permanent loss of £7,500 every single year. That number never recovers. There is no catch-up once you reach 66. The reduction is locked in from the day you start drawing. You are not being foolish for wanting your money earlier. That impulse is completely understandable after decades in a demanding job. But this is a decision that lasts a lifetime, so you deserve to see the real numbers before you commit. Now, here's where many people assume the worst is behind them. They've accepted the early reduction, they know the pension will be lower, but they still think the tax-free lump sum is a separate, free bonus sitting alongside their pension. It isn't. In most public sector schemes, the lump sum doesn't come out of nowhere. You exchange a portion of your annual pension income for it. The scheme uses what's called a commutation factor, and in the NHS and many similar schemes, that factor is typically around 12 to 1. That means you give up £1 of annual pension in exchange for £12 as a lump sum. So a £50,000 lump sum costs you just over £4,100 a year in permanent pension income. Every year. For life. And here's the trap that almost no one explains clearly. If you've already taken the early retirement reduction, you're commuting from a reduced base. You're not giving up £4,100 from a £25,000 pension. You're giving up £4,100 from a £17,500 pension. The lump sum cost doesn't shrink, but the pension it's being cut from already has. Let's bring this together with real numbers. I want to show you exactly what happens to three people facing the same decision. Call her Sarah, 58, NHS, with a pension of £25,000 a year at her normal pension age of 66. Scenario 1, Sarah retires early at 60, takes no lump sum. The 6-year early reduction brings her pension down to £17,500. Her spouse, if she dies after retirement, would typically receive 50% of her pension, so £8,750 a year. Scenario 2. Sarah retires early at 60 and takes a £50,000 lump sum. To get that lump sum, she gives up just over £4,166 a year of pension income using the 12-to-1 commutation factor. That takes her annual pension from £17,500 down to £13,333. Her spouse now gets 50% of that, £6,667 a year. Scenario 3. Sarah waits until 66, takes the same £50,000 lump sum. No early reduction. Starting pension is £25,000. After commutation, £20,833 a year. Spouse gets £10,417. Now compare Scenario 2 and Scenario 3. The difference in the survivor's pension is £3,750 a year. That's the number I mentioned at the start. And it's permanent, over 20 years of retirement, which is not unusual for a spouse who outlives a partner. That's £75,000 of lost income. Not a rough figure. That is what the maths produces. I used to think taking the maximum lump sum was a straightforward decision. Then I ran these numbers for my own situation and realized I'd been focused entirely on the cash and not at all on what happened to the person I was trying to look after. I was wrong about that. The spouse's loss is real. It's built into how these schemes pay out, and it's almost never explained clearly at the point of retirement. There's another layer to this that most retirement conversations skip over. These public sector pensions are linked to inflation, specifically CPI, and that linking has a consequence that compounds over time. If you retire at 60 on a reduced pension of £17,500, inflation doesn't just protect that income. It grows it. At a 3% annual increase, that £17,500 becomes around £31,700 after 20 years. That sounds fine. The problem is, if you'd waited until 66 and retired on £25,000, using the same 3% assumption, that pension grows to around £45,300 after 20 years. The gap between those two numbers is nearly £13,600 a year. At the start of retirement, the difference was £7,500. 2 decades later, it's almost double that. This matters because CPI indexing amplifies whatever base you start from. A higher starting income compounds upward faster in absolute terms. A lower starting income compounds slower. So the decision you make on the day you retire doesn't just affect your income on that day. It affects every year that follows. This is not a new phenomenon. After 2008, when inflation spiked and market returns were poor, people with strong DB pension income found their real purchasing power holding steady, while those relying on investment returns struggled. That was when the value of a guaranteed, inflation-linked income became very clear. So there are 2 paths here. The fragility path: retire early, take the lump sum, start from a lower base. Your pension is smaller, your inflation uplift is smaller, and your spouse's survivor income is smaller. The resilience path: delay, or at minimum skip the lump sum. You start from a higher base. CPI builds from there. Your spouse is better protected. Neither path is wrong for everyone. But you should be choosing with clear eyes about what each one actually costs over time. Now, I know some of you are watching this and thinking, I hear all of that, but I've watched colleagues retire and die within 2 years. I've seen friends who put everything off and never got to enjoy it. Why would I delay on the chance of a better outcome 20 years from now? That feeling is real. It's not a mistake in your thinking. It's a completely human response to watching people around you run out of time. You've worked hard, possibly in a job that takes something out of you physically and emotionally. The pull towards stopping and toward having money in your hands is not weakness. It makes complete sense. But here's what I'd ask you to sit with. The choice isn't simply take everything now or wait and miss out. That's the version we tell ourselves when we're tired and we want the decision to be simple. In reality, there's a middle path that most people never look at. You can retire early at 60 without taking the maximum lump sum. That one change keeps your DB pension at £17,500 instead of £13,333 and your spouse's survivor income at £8,750 instead of £6,667. You still stop working. You still have your freedom. You've just kept the pension income intact. Or, if you have a DC pot or ISAs, you could use those savings to bridge your income from 60 to 66 and then start the DB pension at full strength, £25,000 a year, with a better survivor income behind it. The early years are still enjoyed. The lump sum decision is still available. You've just changed the order. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my wife, a spreadsheet open between us, trying to work out whether taking the lump sum would give us enough to travel in the first few years. I was so focused on that cash figure that I nearly missed what was sitting right next to it on the same spreadsheet, what her pension income would look like if I wasn't around. That was the number that changed the conversation. So what do you actually do with all of this? Let me give you a simple framework, 3 steps that cuts through the complexity. Step 1. Get your scheme's actual reduction factors, not a rough estimate from a generic website. Request an early retirement quotation directly from your pension administrator. Ask them specifically for the early reduction percentage at your target retirement age, the commutation factor for your scheme, and, this is the one most people forget to ask, the survivor pension amount in each scenario. That last one is the number that tells you what your spouse would actually receive. Step 2. Model 3 scenarios side by side. Early exit with maximum lump sum. Early exit with no lump sum. Delay to normal pension age with lump sum. The Money Help Pension Calculator, which is a free government-backed resource, can help you work through these comparisons if you input your actual scheme figures. Step 3, and this is the tiebreaker. Compare the survivor's pension in each scenario. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about a DB lump sum. The £50,000 you take today can be spent in a few years. A holiday, a kitchen renovation, helping the kids out. The income loss your spouse carries is measured in decades. Using Sarah's numbers from earlier, the gap between early exit with lump sum and early exit without lump sum is £2,083 a year in survivor income. Over 25 years, a reasonable lifetime assumption for a surviving spouse, that's £52,000 gone. The lump sum that felt generous is gone in a few years. The income loss runs for a generation. The framework isn't about saying don't take the lump sum. It's about making the choice with the survivor's number on the table, not hidden in the footnotes. Let me show you one more scenario, because some people hear this and think, I'll just invest the lump sum. It'll grow, and that growth covers the income loss. That plan works when markets cooperate. It falls apart when they don't. Imagine you retire at 60, take the £50,000 lump sum and put it into a SIP. 1 month later, there's a 30% market correction. It happens. We saw it in 2008, in 2020. Your £50,000 is now £35,000. You plan to draw £5,000 a year to top up your reduced DB pension of £13,333. At that withdrawal rate, the pot is gone in 7 years. By the time you're 67, after that, you're living on £13,333 a year, and your spouse, if you die first, gets £6,667. Now compare that to the person who took early exit but kept the lump sum decision separate. They retire at 60 on £17,500 a year. They have a DC pot of £50,000 sitting in a low-risk cash buffer, not chasing growth, just bridging income. They also draw £5,000 a year from it. But because that pot isn't exposed to a market crash on day one, it lasts closer to 10 years rather than 7. And their DB pension, untouched, no commutation, leaves the spouse with £8,750 a year instead of £6,667. Over 25 years, that prepared spouse receives roughly £52,000 more, not because they made a clever investment, because they protected the guaranteed income instead of converting it into a market bet. Sequence risk. The idea that a market crash early in retirement is far more damaging than one later is well documented. The problem with investing a DB lump sum right at the point of retirement is that you're taking that risk at exactly the worst possible moment. If you're sitting with a DB pension decision in the next few years, Here are the 4 things I'd do before signing anything. First, request a formal early retirement quotation from your pension administrator. Not a rough estimate, the actual quotation. When you ask, specifically request 3 things: the reduction percentage that applies at your chosen retirement age, the commutation factor your scheme uses, and the projected survivor pension under each scenario you're considering. That last figure is the one most people never think to request, and it's the most important one on the page. Second, sit those numbers side by side across 3 scenarios. Early exit with maximum lump sum, early exit with no lump sum, delay to normal pension age with lump sum. The Money Help website, which is government-backed and free, has a pension calculator that can help you work through this comparison with your own figures. If the numbers are complex, a financial advisor who specializes in public sector pensions can model it with you. Third, if you have DC pension savings, ISAs, or other assets, look hard at whether those can bridge your income from early retirement to your normal pension age. The idea here is straightforward: use the flexible money first, protect the guaranteed income for later. It's not always possible, but when it is, it changes the math significantly. Fourth, if the lump sum genuinely appeals to you, perhaps to clear a mortgage, help with care costs, or pay down a debt, consider taking a smaller amount rather than the maximum. Take what you need for a specific purpose. Leave the rest as pension income. The commutation factor works in both directions. Every pound you don't commute stays in your pension for life. I know this feels like a lot of numbers, but the cost of making an uninformed choice here is measured in tens of thousands of pounds, and in your partner's financial security for the rest of their life. It's worth a few hours with a quotation and a calculator before you commit. Let me bring it back to the 3 things that matter most. First, taking your DB pension early is not free. The actuarial reduction of around 5% per year is permanent. Retire 6 years early on a £25,000 pension and you're locking in £17,500 for life. There is no recovery after normal pension age. Second, the lump sum is not a bonus. It comes directly out of your annual pension income, and if you've already taken the early reduction, you're cutting from a smaller base. The compounded effect on your spouse's survivor pension is significant: £3,750 a year in our example, or £75,000 over 20 years. Third, the desire to stop and enjoy life is not the problem. That instinct is right. The question is how you structure the decision so that the person you love is still protected after you're gone. Retirement planning is not about extracting every last pound from a system. It's about making sure the people who depend on you are looked after when you can no longer provide for them. That's the real calculation. If this video helped you think through your own situation more clearly, share it with a colleague who's facing the same choices. These decisions affect more households than people realize, and most of them are made without anyone ever showing the survivor pension number. And if you want to keep building on this foundation, subscribe. Next time, we'll look at how to use your DB pension alongside other savings to manage your tax position in retirement, because getting the income structure right can save you a significant amount without needing to take on any extra risk. See you there.